have the mic. Oh, we have it. Yeah, it goes out there. And then there's for questions. There is a mic in the audience. There will be when we get to the questions. And I think we're set. Okay. So welcome, everyone. And it's great fun to have you here, Deepak. Welcome so much to Tibet House. We're really grateful for you. We really are. And Deepak and I have been doing different things, and it's really wonderful to discover you, Deepak. It really is. So now, anyway, tonight we're gonna mediate or discuss the meeting, the encounter of Buddha and God, whatever that is. They have had some encounters in the past, I believe, actually, as recorded in the various scriptures. From the Buddhist side, I don't know if in the Abrahamic, I don't think they have any account of Jehovah meeting Buddha. He didn't report back on it anyway, at least not to Moses. Anyway, I'll turn the floor over to you, and you lead off in this dialogue.
It's all right if I stand up?
Absolutely,
absolutely. Comfortable. Well, I was thinking as I was traveling to New York, because we hadn't actually announced the topic, or I wasn't aware of what the topic was going to be. But what I was struggling with was the idea that, looking back at my own life, personally, I've been always interested in the abstract, in the metaphysical, in these great journeys into the infinite and the unbounded and the eternal, and trying to figure it out intellectually. And about less than a year ago, I don't know the exact date, I was at the Royal Albert Hall in England and happened to have a very wonderful private meeting with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And we got into some abstract discussions, because that's where I always direct people, even the Dalai Lama. And he stopped me in the middle of it, and he said, it's interesting, and one can go on into abstractions forever, but how does it change our life? And how does knowing what you are trying to express right now, how does it change people's lives? And I realized that His Holiness, even though he can, if he wants to, take the same journeys, if even into a more extended domain of awareness, that he's a very practical man. And ultimately, what really matters is the essence of Buddhism is the alleviation of suffering. Even the Buddha himself was not really interested in the abstractions of reincarnation theories or the different realms of being, even though Tibetan Buddhism is the authority in all those areas. The Buddha himself was only interested in one question, and what is the cause of human suffering, and what is the way out of it? That's the essence of Buddhism, basically. And so I'm not going to steal the thunder from Bob, who's the expert in this area, but I'd like to start off with just that one question from a Vedantic perspective.
Please.
And then perhaps what we can do is draw the parallels between Vedanta and Buddhism, if that's all right. Because essentially, it's a question of semantics, I think. So Vedanta, which is the great wisdom tradition of India that goes back at least 1500 BC, and the authors of the Vedanta are the great Rishis who span several eras of time, especially the ones who wrote the Upanishads. If I could summarize what Vedanta says about the subject, and in fact, if I could summarize the whole of Vedanta in the next 10 minutes, it would be as follows. It would be as follows. Vedanta says that there are 5 reasons why human beings suffer. And these 5 are called kleshas in Sanskrit, K-L-E-S-H. K-L-E-S-H-A-S. The first klesha, or the first cause of human suffering, is not knowing the true nature of reality. Number one, not knowing the true nature of reality. The second klesha, number two, is clinging to or grasping or holding on to that which is ephemeral, transitory, illusory, insubstantial, and therefore not real. Second cause of suffering. The third cause of suffering, the third klesha, is aversion to, revulsion to, fear from, or fear of that which is insubstantial, transitory, ephemeral, not real, illusory. The fourth cause of suffering is identification with a false and constricted and habitual self, which we call the ego. And the fifth cause of suffering, the fifth klesha, is the fear of death. And Vedanta says, that's it. These are the 5 reasons why humans suffer. Not knowing the true nature of reality, grasping to things that aren't real, running away from and fearing things that are not real, identification with a false self, a constricted self, and the fear of death. Period. All other causes of suffering can be somehow connected to these 5. And then Vedanta goes on to say that these 5 are contained in the first one. The 5 kleshas are contained in the first one. So the only cause of suffering is not knowing the true nature of reality. The only cause of suffering is not knowing the true nature of reality. Vedanta says the true nature of reality is Brahman. Brahman is a word like any other. And if you ask a Vedantist to describe it, he can't. He says he, she cannot describe what Brahman is except to call it that. T-H-A-T, the English word that. In Sanskrit, tat.
Tat.
Tat. And Vedanta says, I am that, you are that, all this is that, that's all there is. And if you really, really get that, then I have nothing more to say. Good night, thanks for coming. The Vedantist refers to Brahman as that. It's infinite, it's immortal, it's eternal, it's ineffable, it's unbounded, it is silent, it has infinite dynamism, it has infinite intelligence, and it is it, whatever it is. And this Brahman projects itself as the universe through what is called the power of Maya. Brahman projects itself as the physical universe, including you and me, as through the power of Maya. The word Maya means technically, etymologically, it means measurement, although it's translated frequently as illusion, because what you're trying to measure is eternity, or the infinite. And in the measurement of the infinite, you create the concept of time, and you give birth to the relative universe. So Maya, measurement, meter, the English word meter, which also is something you use to measure. Maya, meter, measurement, time, music, matter, all refer to the womb of creation, which is the infinite, unbounded womb of creation, which projects itself through the power of Maya into the realm of space, time, and causation. And it does so through the web of karma. Karma is our own past actions on an individual level, but also on a collective level, and ultimately from a deeper, more mythical level. The remnants of karma, our past actions, they are like seeds in our consciousness. And these remnants of karma constantly actualize into our consciousness as our subjective experience. They're just the seeds of past memories, past experiences. They're not the memories themselves. They are virtual memories, just like you have virtual photons and virtual particles. They're virtual memories that don't actually exist in the brain because they are part of the software of our souls. You know, I was watching the other day on 60 Minutes, the person who just wrote Mr. Reagan's biography. I don't know if you saw that program, but there's a very poignant moment in the program where he says that he's a family friend of Mr. Reagan, and apparently Mr. Reagan recently came from a therapy session, and somebody had left a toy White House next to the fish tank, and Mr. Reagan was clutching onto it, holding onto it when he came. And Nancy Reagan tried to pry his fingers open, and he wouldn't let go of it. And finally, she said to him, "Ronnie, what's that in your hand?" And he looked at it for a minute or so, and he said, "I don't know what it is, but I think it has something to do with me. I don't know what it is, but I think it has something to do with me." That's what a sanskara is. That's what a potential memory is. That's the remnant of karma. And I looked at that program and realized, you know, we all have Alzheimer's, all of us. We all have spiritual Alzheimer's.
I'm very relieved to hear that.
Okay.
I thought it was only me.
Yeah. We have this memory, we have this faint memory that somewhere there is a soul over here. A faint memory that somewhere there's a soul here. We know it has something to do with me, and we have no idea what it is. And that's what Vedanta says is the cause of all our suffering. In fact, the Bible says that too. What good does it do a man to find the whole world but lose his own soul? And losing the soul, we begin to have the experience of suffering. So this karmic software, which is constantly actualizing into our consciousness, it appears as our own thoughts, our own memories, our desires, our feelings, our emotions. And during the daytime, what we do is our rational mind, it weaves stories around this karmic software. It does so quite logically, at least to the rational mind. And we live out these stories. We call them everyday reality. And the same thing happens at night, but the rational mind is asleep. And so there is not a consistent logic to the stories at night, and we call them dreams. But Vedanta says the mechanics of the dream and the mechanics of waking state of consciousness is identically, it's the same. One is being given a rationalization and the other isn't, but it's just your karmic software that is appearing in your consciousness, and that you're making stories out of them, and you're living these stories out, and you get so caught up in the melodrama and the hysteria of the stories that you actually forget who you are. It's like going to a really good movie and getting lost in the movie. And therefore, the only way to come out of this tangled hierarchy, because it is a tangled hierarchy where we lose ourselves in the scenery. The seer loses itself in the scenery. The lover loses himself in the beloved. The knower loses himself or herself in the objects of knowledge, never remembering that there is a timeless factor in the midst of every time-bound experience. All experience is time-bound. It has a beginning, a middle, and an ending. But in the midst of all this, there's a timeless factor. It's the experiencer. And the experiencer is the I inside. Not just the personal I, but the collective I and the universal I. That if I start to peel the layers of my soul, I'll go beyond my constricted fabrication, the constricted self-identity that I have, and I'll discover who I really am. And this is the essence of Vedanta. And Vedanta says there are 4 ways to do it. It's as simple as that. The first is called karma yoga, which is to be always reminding yourself that no matter what you're doing, you're not doing it. It's God God does everything. There is only God. And this is the machinery through which that divine intelligence is working. So the essence of karma yoga is to be established in being and perform action. Yogast kuru karmani, as Lord Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita. The second way to find the truth, to find the nature of reality, is through love, the experience of love, which is bhakti yoga or devotion. And it's the simplest and most enjoyable, but it gets you to the same place. So that's the second means to find the truth. Because love is the ultimate reality, and love is not a mere emotion, love is not a mere sentiment, it's the ultimate truth at the heart of creation. And the ultimate truth at the heart of creation is that we are all the same being under different disguises, in different disguises. When we feel that, then it becomes impossible to hurt or be hurt. What the Buddha refers to as compassion is really also the experiential knowledge of love as the ultimate truth at the heart of creation. The third means is Raja Yoga, which is meditation and its allied disciplines. All the different types of ways to dive into the gap between our thoughts, to go beyond the secret passages and the dark alleys of our minds and find this part of ourselves that does not die. And that is the discipline of Raja Yoga, the meditation and its allied principles or techniques. And the fourth means is what is called Gyan Yoga. Unfortunately, I've lost myself in that for my entire life. Gyan Yoga is the intellectual approach, which is also called the razor's edge, because you're using the intellect to go beyond the intellect. And that in itself, it seems to be a paradox, but it's possible to use the intellect and go beyond the intellect, ultimately, to go beyond the rational mind. And that essentially is all of Vedanta, all the 112 Upanishads, somehow or the other, talk around these few principles. If one has gotten close to the event horizon, which is called enlightenment in both the Vedantic tradition and the Buddhist tradition, then that experiential knowledge of immortality solves all suffering, because you find out who you really are. As the Sufi poet Rumi has said in one of his most elegant poems, he says, "By God, when you see your beauty, you'll be the idol of yourself." I've just done a new translation of Tagore's poems, and I chose his poems on the phenomenon and the experience of death, because I've always wondered, what would it be like to be in that place in your consciousness where you have lost all fear and can embrace death as lovingly and as in as much a celebratory mood as you can approach life. You can only do it if you have come home. And so what I'd like to do before I end is read to you about 3 or 4 of these contemporary translations that I have just done from Tagore. And I'll wear my fancy glasses to do that. But you can see what it must be to be in that place. And these poems were written by the Indian poet Tagore, who won the Nobel Prize in 1913, a Bengali poet who was not just a poet, he was a real rishi, he was a real seer, and he had really understood Vedanta. And towards the end of his life, when he was approaching his so-called death, this is what he wrote, and I'd like to read you just for a minute or two what he said. He said, "I know that the day will come when my sight of this earth shall be lost, and life will take its leave in silence, drawing the last curtain over my eyes. Yet stars will watch at night, and morning rise as before, and hours heave like sea waves, casting up pleasures and pains. When I think of this end of my moments, the barrier of the moments breaks, and I see by the light of death your world with its careless treasures. Rare is its lowliest seat, rare is its meanest of lives. Things that I longed for in vain, and things that I got, let them pass. Let me but truly possess the things that I ever spurned and overlooked. You know, other people have said that if you were aware that death is stalking you right now, I look behind myself and the Prince of Death is stalking me. And in fact, if I look back again, it's closer. If I was aware that death is stalking me in every moment of my life would be magical, because I would change my priorities, as he says. Things that I longed for and things that I got, let them pass. Let me but truly possess the things that I ever spurned and overlooked. Here again, he says, and look at the splendor and magnificence of his mood as he approaches his final moments. At this time of my parting, wish me good luck, my friends. The sky is flushed with the dawn, and my path lies beautiful. Ask not what I have with me to take there. I start on my journey with empty hands and an expectant heart. I shall put on my wedding garland. Mine is not the red-brown dress of the traveler, and though there are dangers on the way, I have no fear in my mind. The evening star will come out when my voyage is done, and the plaintive notes of the twilight melodies will be struck up from the king's highway. And one or two more. I was not aware of the moment when I first crossed the threshold of this life. What was the power that made me open out into this vast mystery like a bud in the forest at midnight? When in the morning I looked upon the light, I felt in a moment that I was no stranger in this world, that the inscrutable without name and form had taken me in its arms in the form of my own mother. Even so, in death, same unknown will appear as ever known to me, and because I love this life, I know I shall love death as well. The child cries out when from the right breast the mother takes it away, in the very next moment to find in the left one its consolation. And the final one. When I go from hence, let this be my parting word, that what I have seen is unsurpassable. I have tasted of the hidden honey of this lotus that expands on the ocean of life and light, and so I am blessed. Let this be my parting word. In this playhouse of infinite forms, I have had my play, and here I have caught sight of him that is formless. My whole body and my whole limbs have thrilled with his touch, who is beyond touch. And if the end comes here, let it come. Let this be my parting word. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deepak. What I feel in my heart really is like a feeling of tribute to India, to the great Mahabharata, the great Mother India, because somehow in the dawn of the world, in the 2,500 years ago or 3,000 years ago, the dawn of this recent era of the world, somehow India is the great place where people really saw most deeply, I think, really. This new Euro-American culture, the sort of product of New York, that produced New York, that produced some aspects of ourselves, our conditioning is based in the Mediterranean. Thinks of itself as coming from the Mediterranean. But actually, the Mediterranean was connected by a toll road, like the superhighway of that time, that was maintained by the Achaemenids, the Persians, which went right to the Indus River. And every conqueror worth their salt in the Mediterranean world wanted nothing better but to go to India and conquer something. They didn't know what, but they knew they wanted to get there because they knew that people in India were having more fun. And they wanted to, of course, go and grab that themselves. You know, they were there with their olives and ritsina, and they were dreaming of 2,500 varieties of mango. Now, interestingly, that land of such a great wealth, you know, by far the greatest alluvia of Eurasia, you know, the Harappan civilization, Mohenjo-daro, you know, the Indus, the 5 rivers of the Indus, was at its height 15 times larger than ancient Egypt. You know, a larger alluvium with more people and more wealth and more produce and so on. And therefore, it is in such a country that, such a land, you know, that people first came to both Veda and then Vedanta. You know, Vedanta meaning, you know, the end, Veda meaning knowledge, Vedanta meaning, in a way, the end of knowledge. You know, the final conclusion of knowledge. It occurs to me too, you know, that somehow one of the great Vedantists really was Buddha, in the sense that the Vedantic revolution, you could say, in the middle of first millennium before the Common Era, or starting really at the beginning of first millennium before the Common Era, but ending in the middle, was the time when people threw off the, you know, first level of God. You know, the God, the protector, the tribal God, God, the one who is somehow connected with your fight for survival. Because in India at that time, survival became relatively easy. Things were relatively well organized. You know, life was more gentle, really, actually, in that place. And so people kind of threw off that, and they decided that the human being need not fear reality. And they decided that the human being was capable of knowing reality. This was the great insight. You realize, Deepak, in 10 minutes you brilliantly conveyed the essence of Vedanta. And in the very first thing that you said was everything was contained too, which is that the only reason that we suffer is that we do not know what our own reality is. And that do not knowing is in a Buddha put it, sometimes he put it, of course, just like that. There was no difference. I think there is, first thing I want to definitively announce, there is no difference between Buddha, Dharma, and Vedanta. Absolutely no difference. Some semantic confusion people attach to, but really there is no difference. And in this, because this is the crux and the essence of it is that this not knowing is not merely just like, you know, like I don't know what is in that pipe. I do not know what is behind that wall. That sort of not knowing doesn't really hurt me. The kind of not knowing is that I think I do know what I am. I think I do know what you are. I'm Bob. You are Deepak. And Bob is not Deepak. And somehow Bob is not you. And Bob is like, therefore worrying because there's so much more of you than there is Bob. And so if I think you and Bob are different, then it's like, well, who's going to get whom? Who is saved from whom? Then I think maybe God is not me. I think maybe the pillar is not me, the floor, the objects. I misknow myself as a separate self. I misknow the other as a separate other. I'm put in the situation, therefore, put myself through this misknowing in the situation of struggling with the universe. You struggle with the universe. Who do you think is going to win? You know you're going to lose, of course. I mean, now and then you're feeling kind of a little bit excited or happy, or you're wearing like a Donna Karan suit. Maybe you think you'll win. You know, you feel so good. But underneath, you know you'll lose. You know? And therefore, that you can you'll be a little giddy about how it's fine, but in the long run, you know you're going to lose. Whereas, if you know your nature, you know that we are the same. We are one. Reality is one. You and the universe, you are the universe. How can you lose? There's no opponent, you see. And this is the wonderful thing about India. Comes from India. The idea that we can know our way free of suffering. Now, you could call it jnana yoga, you can call it bhakti yoga, this and that, but it isn't just intellectual, because this kind of jnana is not mere intellectual. It is, of course, not intellectual, because, you know, knowing the nature of reality needs the intellect at least to get focused. But then through through Raja Yoga method, through meditative thing, through Karma Yoga, through acting in a way that you are acting in tuned with everything. And finally through love, because once you know you are everything, then your sort of way of experiencing energy-wise being everything is the same thing as love. Why do we like being in love? Because, remember, when we're not in love, we're all alone against the universe, and it's outdoing us all the time. Suddenly, we feel one with another being, usually as all we can manage. And it's usually also temporary, because we for that moment where we're really happy in love is where we're only living for the happiness of the other being. We lose ourselves in the beloved, right? We die in the beloved. We do. And then at a certain point we feel that's enough of that. How much are they losing themselves in me? And then immediately the separation is reaffirmed, and then it's like who is more with who, and then it's endless dissatisfaction. But that moment, that expansion of the identity to be two, or two as one, imagine therefore in the state of enlightenment, our actual reality, our actual birthright as human beings, as aware, reflective beings, which is that we have the ability, the right, and the natural tendency to be in love with all beings, the entire universe, all of the time. God means, God the lover, God means being in love with everything. And love especially also means, remember, love, bhakti doesn't mean just wishing to possess the beloved. Love means willing the happiness of the beloved. So it's like the endless expansion into happiness. So I have to hail India. Socrates was into it. He saw the harmony of the soul, and he saw something, the getting out of the cave, but he was there with all those tyrants, and all they had was olives and a little bit of goat burger and some ritsina, a few fish, a little bit, no big alluvium, no Greek could manage. They had to go and conquer Egypt to get some wheat, because you can't grow that much in these non-alluvial countries, seafaring countries. And so it's really, we have to thank India for this, and this rediscovery of India today. I can confidently announce, although I'm always confidently announcing that something will happen tomorrow, which never happened, and it's been doing this for 40 years, and probably it's posthumous, later after I attain nirvana, or I'm reborn again as an undergraduate. That's why I'm nice to my undergraduates. I try to be. That we have not completed our Renaissance, the West. The West Renaissance is just beginning. Its first wave was the discovery of the humanism and naturalism of the Greeks, breaking away from the grip of the church and the grip of sort of a lower idea of God, that God the punisher, God the ruler, God is doing this, that mostly was dominating people, feeling that their minds were unworthy, that they could not understand the nature of reality. And we discovered, well, we can understand nature, but then nature was defined as material nature, the atom, the mathematics, the geometry, the pivot, and so then for 400, 500 years now we've been discovering nature. And the human nature, and we've been breaking away from that spirit. In fact, we were scared of spirit because we associate spirit with the Inquisition, with some sort of auto da fe, so we were like running away from the spirit. But in fact, and we think our Renaissance is over, and then some people even say, well, that was no good, the rest of the Enlightenment, and that it caused a lot of trouble, and they're even like giving up, But our Renaissance really gets rolling when we rediscover India. So this is where I have to hail to you, Deepak, because in a way you are the voice of India. And ironically, you are educated as a Westerner. When we did our dialogue at Columbia, remember, it was so funny because you were like doing science and I was doing India. I was saying, but wait a minute, Indian science, remember? Yeah. It was like really, it was counterpoint, But you see, India gives us the courage that we can understand. Who isn't that preposterous? Who do you think, if you said today, you went and announced to your employees, to your friends, to your relatives, I understand my nature, I understand the nature of reality. If you announced that, what do you think they would do? They would offer you a dish of Prozac. Or St. John's wort, I hope, or maybe just some nice Ayurvedic remedy. Because the religious, you can't do that. Only God knows that on the religious side in the West. So nobody can know everything. And on the scientific side, you know how they do. They get billions of dollars, and they study and study, and then when they run out of the dollars, they proclaim, "Ha, we learned a great deal, and now we know so much more about how much we don't know. So give us another grant." Because in principle, you cannot know. You cannot understand. And sometimes, of course, they do announce when their grant providers are getting discouraged with them. They occasionally announce that, well, we will be knowing another 60 years of calculations will bear us out. We'll have the grand theory, so give us another 60 years to prove it. Whereas in India, from this ancient time, they're saying, you don't need a machine. You don't even need mathematics. I mean, that's an ornament, mathematics. These machines are useful. It's all right. But you don't need that because you are the wondrous machine. Long before computers in the cybernetic age, you are the wondrous machine that can turn around in your footsteps, look back into yourself, and fully understand yourself. Completely understand that you are not. There's nothing in you separate from the great self of the universe, as the Vedantic would say, and Buddha would say, you are selfless with regard to that petty self. And your great self of selflessness is at one with all beings and has all knowledge available to it, knows everything by being one with everything. And when you know that, and that's what I always, I'm always thinking, there's Buddha over there, by the way, standing over there, an image, and there's another one sitting. And I'm always happy, when I look at Buddha, I'm thinking, thank goodness he's smiling. Imagine, now I understand everything. And then this next minute you're going, oh no, what a bummer, right? Then we would all be depressed. But instead they said, well, when you know, then you are happy, you see. It's only by not knowing that you're unhappy. Do you realize the vast difference in those two possible claims? Because if our reality is in fact happiness, if our reality is in fact love, if our reality is in fact wisdom, that means the more we can let go of our false constructions of unreality, the more we kind of collapse, actually, the more happy we become. So we don't have to fight with even I'm very happy you announced that we all have Alzheimer's, because when I can't remember anybody's name, I call my children by the wrong names. When I can't remember who I am, then I must be getting happier. I must be getting better. I only get miserable if someone comes and says, you should know exactly this and that. Don't forget that name, that's terrible. See? Then we don't need to know someone's name to love them. In fact, sometimes by knowing their name too well, you might get used to disliking them. In fact. If you forget that you know, sometimes I do. I meet some people nowadays, and they seem to know me. And they say, oh, you're not mad at me anymore. That's great. I say, I guess not. Don't tell me what you did. So anyway, it is India that gives us this encouragement. And therefore, India turned in this ancient time in a different direction than the Greeks, and then the Romans, and then the Europeans, and then the Americans. They turned what I call they did the inward turn. They said that the king and the queen of the sciences is the inward science, the science of how to know yourself, how to know your world, how to know the gods, how to know God, depending on what you mean by it. In the Vedanta, they have a wonderful idea they call Nirguna Brahman and Saguna Brahman, showing how the qualified, that means qualified God, God with properties, God with personality, God with attitude. So it was like putting a burning bush someplace or destroying somebody who gets mad. He has kind of God with attitude. But then there's God beyond attitude. And God beyond attitude is no different from us, and therefore nothing to be afraid of. Anyway, okay. So the first klesha. That's my feeling about the first klesha. So now I'll turn it back to you.
I just have to say one thing is
Yes.
that is that where our science is going today, the direction our science is going today, is actually coming very close to this Vedantic or Buddhist perspective.
Absolutely.
Because if you look at our technology today, whether it's sending someone email or surfing on the internet or using a cell phone, all these technologies are based on a very fundamental premise in science. And that fundamental premise in science is that the essential nature of the material world is that it's not material. That the essential nature of the physical world is that it's not physical. That the essential stuff of the universe is non-stuff. But not only is it non-stuff, it's thinking non-stuff. Because if you go into the atom and you go beyond the atom, which is the basis of all our technology, what do you find? You find an empty void. And this empty void is not a nothingness, it's the womb of creation.
Full of energy.
Full of
Infinite energy.
Infinite energy and infinite information.
Mm-hmm.
And not only is it information, it's information that feeds back on its own self. It has a feedback loop. And when information becomes self-referral, then it's no longer information. Living information is living intelligence.
Right.
So nowhere, no matter where the computer programmers go with their sophisticated feedback loops, nowhere in that model, unless you explain consciousness and understand this Vedantic Buddhist perspective, nowhere is there an explanation for what we call free will, or insight, or intention, or imagination, or inspiration, or creativity, or knowingness, or understanding, or decision making, or meaning. The meaning, the understanding, the insight, the intent, no matter how sophisticated artificial intelligence becomes, doesn't lie in the program. It lies in the consciousness of the programmer. Absolutely. And if you use symbols, you say, I'll use symbols to give meaning, then you'll have to create other symbols to explain the symbols that give the meaning.
That's right.
So no matter where you go, ultimately you get into, there is nothing out there that is not I. There is nothing out there that is not I. The very fact of something separate from me is a fundamental illusion. But it can't be just an intellectual idea. It has to be the experience that, what being in love is actually.
You made me remember where I actually wanted to finish. Let me finish, but you made me remember what I wanted to finish, which is the great Bengali, Atisha Dipankara Srinyana, who went to Tibet in the 11th century and was the founder of the new wave of Tibetan Buddhism at that time. He was asked once, because you made me think of it when you mentioned about abstraction and practical living. Mm-hmm. He was asked once, he said, well, Atisha, you're the great master, you taught all the Dharma, blah, blah, blah. He said, but could you tell us a practical thing? One nobleman, Tibetan nobleman said, and they said, well, what is that? He said, well, could you give us a little marriage counseling? This is my favorite marriage counseling in the universe. And Atisha said, oh, no, you could talk to someone else. Then he said, no, please, we want a marriage counseling. So then he said, okay, you ready? And he said, we're ready. He said, husband and wife, each of them will soon be dead. Therefore, while living, they should be nice to each other. It's not quite Tagore, but it's to the point, don't you think?
Excellent.
I'm sorry, go ahead. But death is great, When I translated the Book of the Dead, which I didn't want to do because I thought there were enough translations. But then I remembered my guru, my old Mongolian guru, who was the teacher of, where did we cross paths? Oh, Ray Chambers' teacher too, who I met in the desert flats of New Jersey. You know what it means for a New Yorker to go? I went all the way to India first, and then I met him in the desert flats of New Jersey, my guru. just beyond the refineries there. That's a real shock to a New Yorker. You know? Talk about non-duality. You know? And what was I going to say?
Convinced you to write about death.
Oh yeah, and he gave me this book, and he said at one time, the copy of the Book of the Dead, when I wasn't at all interested in it, and he said, and I said, oh, it's okay, guys, I'll keep it in the library. He said, no, you take it. You will need it, he said. And I said, okay. You know? Then later someone asked me to translate it, and that because he had done that, I said, okay, I'll do it. Because he said I would need it. But what I discovered in translating the book of the so-called Book of the Dead, which isn't called Book of the Dead in Tibetan, I discovered that there are no dead people. There's no dead people. And Tibet is this amazing culture, which is the child of India. In a way, it is kind of, it's up there on the crown of India. You know, it's over the Himalaya. And when India was hard-pressed at the end of the first millennium with foreign invasions, you know, the first really major organized foreign invasions into India, then this knowledge tradition, a lot of it ran up there over the Himalayas, you know, into Tibet. So it really is totally connected to India, whatever anybody says, political people. And it's the one place where a culture, therefore, talks of death as a natural liberation. And how can we fear death when there is only infinite life? And when you do the Book of Natural Liberation, which is what the real name of the Tibetan so-called Book of the Dead is, it's the book of natural liberation through learning in the between state. Because the minute we die, we are totally aware of our virtual reality, like we are a dream body, we are a Maya body. And therefore, what you hear at that time, like imagine when you die, by the way, you should have Deepak turned on the video player. Because the first thing you're going to know when you're going to be listening to the same people, but then your body-mind will really be a mind-body, a manomayakaya.
Yeah.
The minute you're dead, this thing will be lying there, this wetware, all the wetware will be lying there like, ugh. And you'll be there, and you'll be wondering, who is that? And you'll be there, and then if Deepak is on the video, he'll be saying, bring those neuropeptides into oneness with Brahma. And you will experience that immediately, because you'll totally, whatever you experience in this totally fluid, mind-made body has no resistance from a sort of concrete body filled with fight and flight syndromes and, you know, all of these instinctual, like, you know, like reaction patterns, you know. So you're 9 times more intelligent, they say, in Tibet, the minute you're dead.
Can I give the conceptual
Please.
map for different states of consciousness?
Please.
And see what the parallels are, because there aren't not even parallels are.
Please do.
Okay.
Please do.
So, you know, the way Vedanta describes all of reality is a projection of which state of consciousness you're in. So depending on the state of consciousness you're in, you project a certain kind of reality. The first state of consciousness is deep sleep. And in deep sleep, you also have a certain reality. There's a limited degree of awareness. If I come and scream at you, I say there's a fire on, or your child is crying, and you happen to be the mother, then you immediately respond to that, which means that your spirit is in surveillance even in deep sleep. Mm-hmm. And the spirit creates its own physiology for that moment. The second, so everyone has experienced that, no need to belabor the point. The second state of consciousness is dreams. Now what we have is a little more repertoire of experience, and our brain is functioning a little differently. There are stories that are being weaved by the karmic software, and when we are dreaming, it's very real. No one can convince us that this is not real. It's only after we wake up that we look back and say, oh, that was an interesting dream. The insight that it was a dream happens after you wake up from the dream, not in the dream. Unless you're a lucid dreamer, which is a whole different thing, which we don't want to talk about right now. But the insight that that was a dream only occurs after you wake up from the dream. Now, Vedanta says, when you wake up from that dream, you wake up into another dream. And that other dream is what you call waking state of consciousness. Presumably, you're at least in that right now. Okay? So if you're in that waking state of consciousness, then you are in it, you're participating in it, just like you were participating in the dream, and you don't know that it's equally ephemeral, it's equally transitory, it's equally insubstantial, it's equally illusory. And therefore, of course, you get caught up in the melodrama and the hysteria and the anxiety of the dream because you think it's real. And you will remain in it till you wake up from it. And then after you wake up from it, then you'll have the insight, aha, what an interesting state that was. So, of course, you know, we have different words, bardos and so on. But here we wake up from the waking state into what Vedanta calls the fourth state of consciousness. The fourth state of consciousness when you have a first glimpse of your soul. People have, when they had that, it's been very dramatic for them. So Walt Whitman says, I must not be awake, for everything looks to me as it never did before, or else I'm awake for the first time, and all that was before was just a dream. Okay? Or Gautama Buddha himself. This lifetime of ours is as transient as autumn clouds. To watch the birth and death of beings is like looking at the movements of a dance. A lifetime is like a flash of lightning in the sky, rushing by like a torrent down a steep mountain. But now I'm awake, which is the meaning of the word Buddha. You know, he's asked at the moment of his death, are you a prophet? He says, no. Are you the Messiah? He says, no. He says, who are you? He says, I'm awake. That's all he says. That's the meaning of the word Buddha, the awakened one. Waking up from the insubstantial reality into glimpsing the soul. So actually we could try something right now with you. So you could glimpse it even this moment. As you're listening to me, just turn your attention to who's listening. So as you're listening to me, just turn your attention to who's listening. There's a presence there. It's not your mind. Your mind is still noisy. But just turn your attention to who's listening. And that silent witness, that ever-present witnessing awareness, is the soul. And once we start glimpsing it, then we start to peel the layers of that. And that ever-present witnessing awareness is there even in deep sleep, even in dreams, and even in wakefulness. So the experience that Bob was saying, you're dying and you see the body out there, and you can witness it. Well, both Buddha and Vedanta say, you can do that now. You don't have to wait till the moment of death. And if you enter that now, you will not fear death. Why? Because the unknown then will be known to you, as Tagore says. And when the unknown is known, what's there to fear? To have that ever-present witnessing awareness in sleeps, in dreams, in waking state, is to suddenly wake up to the full reality of the soul. In Vedantic traditions, it's called cosmic consciousness. It's the fifth state of consciousness, the fourth being just glimpsing the soul. And then beyond that, what Vedanta describes as the sixth state of consciousness, where the ever-present witnessing awareness becomes obvious to you cognitively and perceptually, even in the objects of your perception. So you look at that tree and you say, yes, and you know the Buddhists have this technique.
Sure.
You look at that tree and you look long enough in that special state of meditative awareness, and you see there's a tree there, but there are also rainbows and sunshine and earth and water and wind and space and the infinite void and the whole history of the universe right there in that tree. And you go beyond that and you see there's a spirit, there's a soul, there's a presence, there's an ever-present witnessing awareness right there. And that's called the sixth state of consciousness. And then a time comes when the ever-present witnessing awareness here in the subject of perception and there in the object of perception is actually the same presence. The whole thing was a perceptual artifact to begin with. So there's only one witness, and the whole universe is an expression of that. And that is what Buddha calls enlightenment.
Exactly.
And you know, it's not that difficult to understand. You can actually map out these different states of awareness and soon, hopefully, have the research grants
Absolutely.
to look at how the brain functions in these different states of awareness.
Yeah.
So that people really, for the first time, feel that this is not mere esoteric, Eastern, philosophical, metaphysical speculation that occurred in the consciousness of some enlightened beings, because we all have the same hardware, the same nervous system, and what was possible for Buddha, he himself says, is possible
Absolutely.
for you.
Absolutely.
We are the bodhisattvas.
And that should generate, Deepak, a whole, I call it Deepanta. Not Vedanta, not Buddhanta, Deepanta.
No.
Deepanta, that is Deepanta. And, that is why I say it's a renaissance. I mean, India is the mother where people were less harassed, who asserted their ability to know their own reality. That's the reason there were more of them, is there were plenty of them in the Mediterranean too, but then some tyrant would arrest them. Even Socrates, What did they give Socrates? We call it a hemlock milkshake around campuses, It's not too healthy, It's not a fruit shake, And so they kind of wiped them out in other places because the authority wanted everybody just not feeling that they know everything. They wanted everybody just working. They wanted them obeying orders. So it happened everywhere. But what we have to have on the planet now, secularism and the pretensions of materialistic science are not really believed broadly on the planet anymore. What people call fundamentalism, which exists in Hinduism, in Islam, in Christianity, in Buddhism, in every one of the world religions now. Eastern Orthodoxy, it's asserting itself very powerfully again in the world, and that trend will continue because there is disillusionment in the promises of the great secular materialist age. We're going to save everybody. Everybody's going to have a stainless steel pacemaker, do you know what I mean, and a new brain that they're going to make in IBM is going to, Bill Gates is going to come and live in your brain and make everything work well. And people are really giving that up on the planet. But then, if spirituality returns in this old way where people are content and where there's a few mystics who are allowed to know, and everybody else is supposed to just believe and obey, and they're going to have a vengeful God, or they're going to have this kind of jealous God, or they're going to have that kind who's going to go and say, kill the unbelievers, we're going to have absolute chaos. There's going to be like the anthrax crusades. There's going to be nuclear religious wars and things. It's just totally impossible. So there should be now a Manhattan Project of the spirit, a Manhattan Project of the mind. If anybody had any brains today, they would be doing that. But my point is, this is a national priority, because people go around and say, oh well, but gee, well, you really think people can understand? No, never. No, they'll never understand. No, Jerry Falwell is going to always be an idiot. And, or else, he's going to be great and the rest of us will be Satan, whatever. It's going to be hopeless polarization is coming. Believe me, the new religious wars are going to make the old ones seem like a tea party. Nuclear-tipped crusaders running around like da-di-da, It's going to be really terrible. Only solution is to take our ingenuity, to take our technologies, to take our information age, and make it where Buddha is on satellite. We have Academy Awards, we have Enlightenment Awards. And, billion people simultaneously can meditate on recognizing the self in others. No, really. And they can do that. People definitely can do that. I know some Tibetans, who don't know much. They know they can chase their yaks around a field. They don't have a great deal of knowledge. They have bhakti. But, they have been steeping themselves in a culture that understands the connection of knowledge and love, and understands that through their theory of karma, of course, and reincarnation, that we have all been reborn infinitely intertwined, all of us. We've all been lovers. Even the guys, we've all been lovers. We've all been parents and children. We've all been enemies too, but we won't be mentioning that. We've all had all different kinds of problems, but we've been infinitely intertwined. So when this kind of toothless Tibetan today, kind of out there with their yak, knowing very little, looks at you, you feel that they see the kinship in you. And that's all that is needed. So that when your wild, crazy Muslim fundamentalist looks at your wild, crazy Lynchburg, Virginia Protestant fundamentalist, the two are looking at each other, you know, with their each notion of a triumphal nuclear-tipped God, and yet they look beyond that and they see kin. They see this one guy wearing pajamas and this other guy wearing his little puffy suit, that they're kin. Then they won't kill each other. So these are, you know, the change in consciousness that is planet-saving for our, you know, when you say Maya, I always think my grandchild's name is Maya. I can't help it. When I think of Maya projecting, I'm thinking of my little Maya grandchild, who is so cute. Such a gentle projection. At the moment.
Of Brahman.
At the moment of Brahman, exactly. But, you know, what are we doing with children and grandchildren and whatever if we're not going to take the fate of this planet seriously? And how can we condemn this planet to a bunch of fanatics with nuclear weapons and germ weapons? I heard, I won't get into it, but the germ business from Russia spreading everywhere through Asia and the Middle East is truly terrifying, actually. Truly terrifying. So this is, I'm very into this Shri, you know, second Renaissance, the goddess Shri, you know. Vishnu's, isn't that Vishnu's consort?
Right. But I think in order to make that happen,
yes,
we must not
yes,
create the schism
yes,
that currently exists between science and spirituality.
absolutely.
Because that is the divide right now.
Right.
Either you're a scientist or you are a spiritual being, and the two have nothing to do with each other.
Right.
Mystical poets, etc., have had insights
Right.
without going into the science or the logic of it. So there's a poem again, Rumi from the 12th century. In one of his poems, he says, "I have lived on the lip of insanity, wanting to know reasons, knocking at the door opens, I've been knocking from the inside." Now we all get that immediately. Mm-hmm. But now what the scientists are also saying, at least in quantum physics, is that the cosmologist who studies the cosmos is an expression of the cosmos.
Right.
The physicist who studies the laws of physics is an expression of those laws of physics.
Right.
So there's no such thing as objective science.
Right.
It's all subject, object, process of interaction, as you said, woven together.
Right.
Inextricably woven together.
Right. Right.
Science has to change.
Absolutely.
The way science is done has to change.
Right. Well, it is changing slowly. But then there's all this kind of resistance because of they're sort of indulged in being sort of the great authority. But you know, the Buddhists have a saying, Deepak, that the Dalai Lama often says in his dialogues with the scientists, but he never says it too loudly. And I don't think that they've quite heard yet, some, but quite. And that is that there's 3 levels of relativity from Buddha's teaching, 3 levels. And the first level of relativity, which is the coarsest one, is where Buddhism and science completely meet, but with a different focus. Buddhists toward the interior as more important, not exclusively important. The exterior is also important. Medicine and biology and all that is important. But the interior is more important. But that's cause and effect, you know, causality. And that's the first level. And there's attunement, and there can be a lot of dialogue. Second level is the level of part and whole, and analyzing things in terms of parts and wholes. And that's a more subtle level. And there's also, however, with the sort of, you know, subatomic and the micro dimension, everything, there's also parity there, and there's interconnectedness with science. The third level is the level of word and referent, or concept designation and designated, you know, where mind is involved through the word. You know, through Shabda Brahma. You know?
Yeah, because there's nothing that exists for which you don't have a word.
Exactly. And in fact, the word is co-creative with the thing, so that subject and object interconnect with name and form, as they say. And, you know, if you take Heisenberg's uncertainty principle and you say that the subjectivity is, in fact, warping the objectivity in observing it, that destroys the notion of the privileged observer who observes reality, quote-unquote, objectively, not being a participant in reality. which was the Western exaggeration in the attempt to escape from the church.
I hope everybody gets this, because it's very important what he's saying just now.
But so they have that Heisenberg, but then then they just think the language is mathematics, which is of course a brilliant and wonderful language, but it's even ordinary words. It's mantra is what it is. The ultimate scientific use of languages and poetic, where science and poetry meet, is mantra. Om mani padme hum. And this mantra is where word is co-creative with form, and with life, and with vibrancy, and with liberation, and so forth. And that's where Zolas now and then quietly says, in the middle of these dialogues where the great scientists are talking about all their great technology, he's saying, we're waiting to talk there, on that level of relativity, where people are responsible for their mind's engagement and creative engagement with reality, what Deepak calls where the creative level of God the Creator, sixth level, I hope. Am I getting it right? Sixth or fifth? Fifth level. See, I'm not that well schooled yet. Fifth level of God, where the individual takes responsibility of co-creating with God the world, which does not just mean that you're some big deal. It means you better be careful what you think, what you say, because it creates. It's creative. It's divine. Right?
Absolutely. What you said is so important. Can I
please
the concept that Bob has just expressed of co-creation? See, there's constantly this antagonism between the materialists who say that matter causes the subjective experience. So I look out there, and everything out there causes me to have a subjective experience. That's the materialists say that. Other people say, no, it's like, what's his name, Bishop, Barclay Bishop.
Right.
He says, no, it's the other way around. The consciousness projects itself as the material universe. And what Buddhism says is you're both wrong. We are interbeings that arise in the inter-isness, and we are constantly co-creating each other out of that inter-isness. And what physics calls that now is a tangled hierarchy. Mm-hmm. A tangled hierarchy is something that you can't get out of it, because the tangle is infinitely interwoven. So to make it simple, in grammar, a tangled hierarchy would be the following sentence: I am a liar. See, the subject qualifies the predicate, and the predicate qualifies the subject. If I say I'm a liar, then if I'm lying, I'm telling the truth. And if I'm telling the truth, I must be lying. So what am I? Am I truthful or am I a liar? That's a tangled hierarchy in grammar. And you cannot get out of the tangled hierarchy while you stay in it. The only way to get out of the tangled hierarchy is to jump out of the system, to transcend the system. And in this case, in grammar, you would say, who's making that statement? I am a liar. And the one who's making that statement is the potential for both lying and telling the truth. So you understand what a tangled hierarchy is? Now in physics, tangled hierarchy says that the subject of experience and the object of experience co-arise simultaneously, moment by moment, from a transcendent domain which is beyond space and time. And that's who you are. You are neither the subject, nor the object, nor the process of interaction between subject and object, but the potential for the whole thing, for the subject, the object, and the process of interaction, which is very Vedantic and very, very much Buddhism.
This is where Buddhantic and Vedantic, I think, are very mutually reinforcing. Because imagine yourself now, just for a moment, suddenly experiencing, don't think that, enlightenment some other day, some other life, some other time. Imagine yourself experiencing being all the other people simultaneously with yourself, entangled in that. Imagine, everyone thinks, Buddha's blissful, therefore, I don't have to worry about Buddha. So they wouldn't ever want to imagine. But imagine, although they say Buddha is blissful, but imagine how frustrated he is, blissfully frustrated he is. Why? Because he suddenly has an experience, or she, there are Ms. Buddhas, Mrs. Buddhas, and Ms. Buddhas, both. And has this experience that suddenly, just imagine yourself right now, you suddenly imagine that you're sort of going ahead feeling like you're you know, enclosed within your subjectivity, the sense data, the stimuli coming into your sense thing, into your subjectivity, right? And at the same time, suddenly, to your amazement, on the lip of insanity, you are perceiving yourself as everybody else too. Now, and yet you're blissful. It's all, you have that expansion because of a feeling of intense bliss. And you think of all, you experience all reality as intense bliss. Now, you look over there and you find you don't have to look too far. Of course, no one in this room, so it'll be hard to imagine here. But you don't have to look too far, and you'll see somebody with a really grim look on their face. Real furrowed brow. Deep headache and suffering and misery. And you're experiencing every cell in their being as a bliss, and they have caught themselves up in the theater of torment. And they haven't got enough, and they're mad at somebody, and they're wronged by somebody, and they're deeply wounded, and they're like, can't get it, and it's all after them. And you're seeing this person like creating hell for themselves. And you see every synapse and cell and neuropeptide within that as bliss, and yet you can't just bliss them out of it. Because they perceive your energy flowing to them as a bliss, they perceive it as more pressure, and then they fold that into their theater of torment. So this is compassion. Then you have to put on some sort of a theater. You have to think of how to like distract them. It's like, hey, it's like a kid who's having a tantrum, you know. You have to like, oh, look, there's Mickey Mouse or something. So that they forget they're having the tantrum. And Buddha and God together are thinking of one theatrical performance after another to distract people from turning their own deeply innate nature of bliss into some sort of theater of torment. So this is where compassion, non-duality, becomes dynamic activity. And this is why Avalokiteshvara explodes with 1,000 arms. You know, those 1,000 arms are not just some freaky thing, like some kind of weird millipede or millihand. Those 1,000 arms symbolize that his heart is exploding into, reaching into all of the beings' hearts and lives, trying to do something to like cheer them up, you know, pat them on the back. And not to be clumsy in doing it, each hand has a sensitive eye in the palm, you know, so he sees exactly like a robot, you know, like a bionic robot, like seeing in every direction, reaching into all these lives.
The 1,000 arms of compassion.
1,000 arms of compassion. That is what this thing means, okay? So now, think of that 1,000 arms. Think of your 1,000 arms as you empathize with all beings and your bliss, when your bliss flows beyond being encased within your skin, and your bliss becomes the field awareness of an enlightened being that enfolds other lives within it, and yet doesn't take them over. It's not body snatching. It's not like taking away their lives. It's just feeling every element of their life like a CAT scan and letting them have the life, but then not just letting them suffer it through, helping encourage them to figure out how to enjoy it. Any comments or questions?
West and East and science and religion have been tangoing for millennia, and it seems like it may be coalescing. And the individual vision of unity is always present. Is there a collective possibility of this occurring?
I think there is, and you know, you would say, why now and why never before? Because, you know, even though Bob painted a beautiful picture of the ancient Indian civilization, and it is beautiful, but I have to say that we're still talking about an eclectic group of luminaries in ancient India.
Sure.
The majority of Indians were barbarians and still are. Sorry. Okay. Much though, you know,
Sure,
and that's true of the majority of humanity. Yeah. When we think of ancient Greece, we think of Parmenides, we think of Socrates, we think of Plato, we think of Pythagoras, and we say, aha, Greek civilization. But look at what the majority of Greeks were doing. They were throwing children, handicapped children, to the lions. They were sexist. They believed in slavery. So we cannot say of any civilization has the prerogative or the privilege for enlightenment, not even India, with all due respect. I'm an Indian, you know. And so we've never had a golden age, never. There has never been a renaissance. The history of human beings has been the history of torment and suffering. So why is there room for optimism now? The room for optimism is A, because science is catching on. Science, science is a wonderful thing. It can give us monstrosities, but it can also create amazing benefits for us. And the same science that we can use to destroy the world, we can create a new age of real renaissance. And so the reason I say there is hope today is because we have the internet, we have media, and what is a good idea can collectively, immediately saturate a critical threshold in collective consciousness. If an idea is appealing, you cannot stop it. You cannot stop it. And the idea of a collective enlightenment is now being born, and it cannot be stopped. It's like a child that comes out of the womb cannot go back to the womb. The idea is born, and with our technology, it will manifest.
That's great. I also think personally, because I locate barbarianhood right here.
Yes.
Bob Redneck, raw redneck Buddhantic. And barbarism is here also, mixed, I don't claim to perfection at all. But I count myself lucky at the blessing of Maya, at seeing Maya and the creative, I think God and Brahma and Indra and Buddha and all the bodhisattvas and all the goddesses and the female Buddhas and so forth, I think they sort of surrounded humanity, Like science, for example, being materialistic, they sort of like trying to grab and cling and misknow and make atoms, and then the atom one day sort of pops up, and there's Buddha, in the atom, and Brahma coming out of the atom. And it's like we're kind of surrounded by angels, without realizing it, And they've created this like network of, we call it, it's called, actually in the Indian vision, Indian mythology, the Jewel Net of Indra is an expression. And the Jewel Net of Indra is this network of jewels that's from ancient time in India, before there was computers and things, and TVs and things. In the Sudarshana, there's a city on the top of the Indian Olympus, of the Indian cosmology, where Indra rules, which is actually only a lower heaven, way below the Brahma heavens, But it is one kind of real estate type heaven, which is like Olympus, very, very, they have a really good time. They have the best jacuzzis, much better than Palm Springs or Bel Air or whatever, and they hang out up there. But the one thing that they have is this Jewel Net of Indra, and this Jewel Net hangs over the city, and the net is faceted in such a way that when you look in any facet of the jewels, you see all the other facets of the jewels. So it's like a telephone system. It's better than, it's a holographic system that is over that city. And so this Jewel Net of Indra is like hung around the whole planet, and we see reflected in that, all of each other's interconnections and souls. We've been born and reborn, and we've gone through this agony and that agony, and everybody's back, and nobody is lost, and no baby has been lost, and we're all here, and we're like staring and glaring at each other, and we've done each other in infinite numbers of times, and we're like sick of it. And luckily, they go in. I think, I'm afraid, like since the Cold War, everybody's congratulate themselves on mutual assured destruction. But I had a vision once, actually, when I was in Almora, actually, when it was 1971, Bangladesh war time, very dangerous time. Soviet Union and China were also fighting. At that time, I think some people did press some buttons, actually. There were some buttons pressed. But I saw like different angelic beings, It was just an Almora vision, but different angelic beings just like jammed all of the computers. They totally just jammed it all. No signals were transmitted. Nothing flew. And ever since then, I began to become a little tiny bit religious, which I'm basically like a hard-grained intellectual. But I really did see that, And I think we do have this kind of angelic protection. We have this destiny. We have this synchronicity. This is going to happen now. It is possible to happen now because you and I and Deepak are going to make it happen. Because we won't let it not happen. Because we have our children and our grandchildren. What do we do that for? If we're going to turn over this planet to like anthrax merchants and things, what's the point? We are going to see to it, and then there's all these nurturing beings around us that are going to help it out. because we're so incredibly incompetent.
And, and remember, the nurturing beings are actually, again, aspects of ourselves,
of
the
course.
angels. Yeah? So
And
Rumi says, when I die, I shall soar with angels, and when I die as an angel, what I shall become, you cannot imagine.
that's wonderful. I think Rumi inspired
Yes.
Roosevelt, actually, who
Yes.
of course said,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
There's nothing to fear but fear.
Yeah.
With fear, we will destroy ourselves. But with love, realizing that if we even let go of everything, even if you die and you're embraced by love, how can you fear death? If we insist upon that.
I was thinking as you were talking about the spiritual influx, the Eastern influence that we got gradually in America from India and from the East in general. And primarily it was happening around about the 60s as a great accentuation. And that was the period of the use of drugs. I am not involved in the use of drugs, but I have a great deal of curiosity about it in the sense that we have this, I think to myself, I meditate and I have this heavy, heavy, heavy incrustation that I can't seem to break through in a way. You know, I think you know what I'm saying. In a, you know, I mean, how do we get there? How do we get there in this lifetime? How do I get rid of this wall to get to reality?
Yes, for many people, and by the way, the 60s generation has not disappeared. We are sitting here right now, okay? I mean, it never went away. We're sitting right in front of you. We are that generation. So it never really did go away. That was a sudden appearance, and it has continued to grow. The media took away the attention, and now the media is bringing back the attention. But we were never satisfied with the status quo, whether it was the Vietnam or the war movement or the anti-war movement, whether it was ecology, whether it was feminism. We are the ones who started it. A proud generation that is now reaching its maturity. That was our adolescence. That was our puberty. And now we are reaching our maturity, or we think we are.
I'm over the hill.
Yeah? No, you're not, sir. I'll tell you when you get there.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Okay, Doc.
So it has never gone away. The drug experience for many was a dramatic experience into an altered state of consciousness. And it's true for many spiritual traditions where they use drugs to immediately, whether it's peyote or whether it's mushrooms or whatever, to immediately cause a shift, as Carlos Castaneda would say, in the assemblage point, where you assemble the universe in consciousness. But to stay with that experience causes a lot of disintegration. You know, you can have an experience, and if it is dramatic and sudden and radical, there's a thin line between sages and psychotics and geniuses. You know, it's a motley group of sages and psychotics as well. So I would caution that the drug experience is not the way to go for anyone, even though for many, including our friends the Beatles and many others, it was their first insight.
The catalyst.
The catalyst, but it's not the way to go.
Yes, I would like just to add about the breaking through is like take a break. Don't push so hard sometimes. The beautiful thing about Vedanta, about Buddhanta, is that, and the difference between that and some other kinds of ideas of reality, is that the reason Buddha was happy, the reason he smiles, is that what he saw is that it is your actual nature to be happy, to be free, to be released. It is not that you have to create it and break through something to get it elsewhere. It is actually your nature. And sometimes trying too hard to get something that you conceive of as a freedom and misconceptualizing your actual state as a bondage can be over-exaggerated, and one can just kind of relax a little bit. The Dalai Lama always says, I think very rightly, that we mustn't try too hard and set too high an image of what we're trying to get to, because it's actually a trick of how to like defeat our positive outlook. You know, just a tiny little bit we get a little bit like drop by drop, we fill the bucket, you know. Step by step, we cross the forest, you know, we cross the desert. We don't try to like run all the whole time and then collapse and then feel that it's impossible, if you follow me. So if you feel too much pressure and too much frustration about trying to break through, take a break.
Take a break.
Take a break. So meditate 2 minutes a day only. Don't meditate a half an hour. 2 minutes. And actually, one of the tricks is to quit when you're still enjoying it. Deny it to yourself. Don't hog up all the end when you're like kind of collapsing. I got to make 30 minutes. I got to keep meditating. Then you won't want to meditate again. When you first 2 minutes, you're like zing, then stop. Then you can't wait to get back to it. This kind of little play tricks on yourself and have fun and take a break. Okay? I want to thank you, Deepak.
It's a privilege. It's a privilege to be with you.
For coming to visit us at Tibet House.